Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Blacks in Technology presents The Tech Life Getting Hired. The Tech Life Getting Hired is a series of interviews in which we speak to Black women and men about their journey in being hired by some of the top tech companies around the world. And we use that information as a resource to give back to our community in hopes that they can use the knowledge to help them in their journey towards a career in tech. I'm your host, Greg Greenlee, and on this episode, we'll be speaking with Grace Andrews and James Jones. Both are technical solutions engineers at Puppet. And with that, Grace just joined us. I want to welcome James and Grace. Thanks a lot, you two, for joining us tonight.
Yep. How's it going, everybody?
Can you hear me? We can't hear you, Grace. No. We'll give her a second to get the audio going. So while we give her a second, we're going to start with James. James, can you give us a little bit of information about yourself, a little bit of background, your education, kind of how you got into tech?
Yeah, sure thing. So I really got started with tech all the way back in high school. I mean, it's always been kind of a hobby of mine. And back then, as I was just looking for summer jobs, one of the first ones I got was an internship at this company, S&C Electric, where my dad used to work, and just got a job in their IT department, just helping support desktops and laptops. And pretty much ever since then, I was in love with that as a career and wanted to kind of stick with it. So after that, went to college at Northwestern, and I actually did a major in psychology, but minored in computer science. And then after that, ended up working my first job at HP as a sales engineer, supporting desktops and laptops for sales, just their kind of personal computers for businesses. So kind of got to learn a little bit of the ropes of how to sell to corporate accounts. And after that, did another kind of switch and ended up working as a sysadmin for a little while at this company called Big Machine, which later got acquired by Oracle. But all of that ended up leading me to have kind of the right background to get a job at Puppet, which was really exciting, and I'm still here today.
Excellent, excellent. And Grace, can you give us a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into tech, a little bit about your educational background as well? No, we still can't hear you. Dang technology.
Yeah, fails you when you need it most.
Right, right. So we'll come back to you, Grace, here in a second. All right. Tell us, James, can you tell us a little bit about, kind of how'd you, well, let's go back a little bit. I know you said that you started out, or not started out, but you had a position as a sales engineer, and now you're working as a solutions engineer at Puppet. Kind of tell us why being a sales engineer helped you and where you're at now as a solutions engineer.
Yeah, so at Puppet, a solutions engineer essentially ends up being the same role as a traditional sales engineer, where you're kind of the first line of introducing a particular technology to a customer. And so, in this role, it's kind of a situation where I go and meet various customers, figure out what problems they maybe have, where Puppet can help solve them and maybe make their situation a little bit better, and then start to use the technical background that I have to, try to fit that solution appropriately to their organization and actually solve some of their problems. So back when I was at HP, and even though it was just, hardware for laptops and desktops for companies, it was still a lot of the same needs, figuring out, what they needed, what was the appropriate solution, in terms of processor speed or hard drives, memory, or whatever it might have been, but it's still kind of the same motion.
Excellent, excellent.
Is my audio working now?
Yes, it is. Yay. All right. So I'm gonna back up a little bit and introduce Grace Andrews to the show. Thanks, Grace, for joining us. And our first question was, give us a little bit about your background, your educational background, and how'd you get into technology?
Yes, awesome. I love this question because I think I have a background pretty similar to James in the sense of I grew up in a technologically forward house. My parents were not the ones that were technologically forward, but my brother was. So when we immigrated to the US, one of the first things my dad did is he insisted on us having an Encyclopedia Britannica set, but not a real one because those are very expensive and he is very frugal. And so he decided he was going to get one of those like off-brand, do-it-yourself, build-it-yourself series of books. And so my brother and I had, it was like a 5 or 6 volume set of books that talked about, how to make a little light bulb with a potato, or how to make your own little radio, or how to create your own little circuit system. And so we would work on stuff like that. And we would get in trouble for trying to take apart the microwave or trying to take apart the radio because we needed parts for our little projects. And so, my mom would say, whatever you take apart when you put it back together needs to work the same. So that was her way of encouraging us, I think. And so I grew up in a house that was definitely, we were encouraged to do that kind of stuff. I don't think I ever thought of technology the way I'm working with it now as a real professional opportunity. But all throughout my middle school and high school experience, my brother kept trying to force me to say that I would study computer science in college because he was studying computer science in college. And he thought that that's what I should study. He's like, man, this is the future. And it made me think of all the times where he'd rebuilt the family computer, or when he had done, some networking for the high school computers when he was in high school. And I would kind of just tag along. I was more of a silent observer.
Right.
He would, he's like, here, give me that, give me this, and like, put that in there. So he would just order me around. But it was a really great informal way of getting my hands on a technology and having a really broad view of what it means to be technical. And so when I went to college, I did the exact opposite of what my brother said. I majored in sociology, anthropology, and politics because why computer science? And I didn't even minor in it. I didn't even think about minoring in it.
Right.
But at the end of my freshman year, a good friend of mine approached me about working at the university computing help desk. She at the time was the only female there. She was also one of, I think, 4 female computer science majors and the only Black computer science major at our undergraduate. So she was very encouraging, and she said, you should do this. And I was like, why? There are no other people that look like you at the university computing help desk. I told her, I'm not that technical. I don't know what I would do. And she's like, well, you have a brain and you have hands, so we can teach you. And I think you'd be a great fit. And so I applied for the job. I got the job. And so I started helping support computers across the university, including computers in the labs, professors' personal computers, as well as student and university staff computers. So we got to do a lot of stuff from, helping when networking was down to just telling someone the bad news that spilling coffee on your laptop means that your laptop is dead. So it was a really,
caffeinated.
Yeah, right. The computers sadly have to have decaf coffee. So it was a great opportunity to understand that part, and it really built out my customer service around technology. I think there are a lot of technologists who are great with technical tools, but aren't great with people. Not because they don't want to be, but because they haven't had that practice. And that was one of the things that I excelled at the University Computing Help Desk. I was always the one that was called to tell people that, we lost all of their stuff, or what they needed fixed was impossible for university computing to do, or when, the difficult professor needed you to do something about their computer that just died before finals and all the papers were on it, they would say, you go talk to them, right? And so I really learned that there's an art in being able to not just work with the machines, but work with the people who depend on those machines.
I think you raise a really good point. I try and mentor some students from a program called Per Scholas, and at times when I talk to them, the first thing out, they want to do once they graduate from the program is become a systems engineer, like right out the gates. And one of the statements that they always tend to make is, I don't want to do that help desk stuff. That seems too. And I'm just like, hey, now I started from help desk for one. But the other part of it is that you do gain those soft skills that you may not see as a systems engineer, because systems engineers typically they don't talk to um, the customers, right? Kind of what I do now, the developers are my customers. So that's a different language than talking to the everyday person. Um, and so, I try to tell them like, hey, there's some skills there that you can gain just from a personal side that can be invaluable and also can help you move forward in your career, because then you're able to speak to other people a lot better, and you'll be a lot more comfortable around people. So great advice there. So kind of I want to start with you, Grace, or continue with you with this. James told us a little bit about, what a technical solution engineer does. Can you kind of go through your average work day and some of your key responsibilities?
Totally. I think, because James is out in the field and we're his inside counterpart. So our jobs are both similar and very different. I think
Okay.
that for the inside SEs at Puppet, we get a lot of chances to, I think, collaborate internally with other teams. So what I mean by that is a typical day for me usually involves customer calls, of course, because we're there to support the customers, customer demonstrations, etc. But what's really cool is the stuff that we get to build around that. And so maintaining the demo environment, and you can ask James, because I've been a real bad partner on our part of the revamp of our demonstration environment. But that kind of work, like being able to interact with new technologies, being able to restructure and rebuild even the way that we use our technical tool for ourselves and the way we show customers. So, I've been shadowing James, trying to learn a little bit more about testing and how testing affects the way in which people are using our tool. But I'm having that same sort of customer experience. So I think a lot of the time our job is centered around empathizing with the customer, but also doing what the customer would do, right? So we get to play a lot. So if we currently have a lot of customers asking about network devices and network device management with Puppet, so what a few of us are working on figuring out how to install a Puppet agent on a network device, how to use proxies, how to demonstrate that for a customer, right? So we have to learn it too, to show it. I think the field gets to do a lot of that stuff too, but they end up having to do it like right in front of the customer with the customer is watching. And I think
Right.
that we get to kind of do it in a more, I don't want to call it academic setting, but I want to say more of a lab setting, because we get
Right.
to collaborate with each other on the team, leverage the collective experience of other members, and then also talk to other organizations internally, right? We can beam straight up to engineering and say, well, what's the difference between an agent that's installed on a Cisco network device and one that's installed on an Ubuntu machine, right? We can start to really ask those questions. We can even go upstairs and ask those questions. We can go sit with some people and have those conversations.
Right.
So a typical day for us is usually not that typical, because we're learning different things and getting to learn. And besides that, I think that there's also a lot of work that we do around documentation and process building. If we can learn something and we can teach ourselves something, being able to report on that and being able to chronicle that so that we can help our customers is a vital part of our job. So a lot of the stuff that we do is around that, is around making sure that we ourselves are producing resources that we can use to enhance that experience of our customers. So we get to, create our own technical slide decks, and we also get to take notes and present to each other about what we're working on. And that's the part that's a lot of fun, is not just using the technology, but figuring out how you can learn more technology and teach other people that. So I'd say a day in the life, I was like that of maybe an educator or a teacher, because you have to go learn the thing to then teach and do the thing.
Very, very nice. And I want to get back with you on the documentation piece, because I think that is also an important kind of soft skill to have as well. And I'll talk to you in a second, but I kind of want to pull back just a little bit, because we're talking about, Puppet, we're talking about agents being installed on network devices, and we haven't even defined what Puppet is, what the company does. So I want to ask James if you could give us a little bit of background on Puppet, the company, and what Puppet does.
Yeah. So Puppet's been around for a while. It was founded back in 2005. Essentially, what it does, what problem we're trying to solve is, for a lot of organizations, they may have hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of servers. And so it starts to become pretty arduous to, configure and set up, the various settings on an operating system, or install various applications that you need to do on those servers. And so the whole idea with Puppet is giving you an automation engine, if you will, to be able to describe what those servers should look like with a general model that you build with code, and then apply that broadly and be able to do it consistently for all of those servers. And so that's kind of what Grace is talking about with the agent. That's what's doing that heavy lifting of actually configuring all of those servers or network devices or cloud instances or whatever. Right. And that's really what we try to solve for our customers.
Excellent. So I want to talk a little bit about the interview process. But first, I want to. How did you actually hear about? I'll start with you first, James. How did you actually hear about your position at Puppet, or your initial was the solutions engineer your first job at Puppet? And if so, kind of how did you hear about that job?
Yep. So it was the first job I heard about at Puppet. So I've been in that same position since I started. And how I first heard about it, I just got contacted one day by a recruiter, and they told me a little bit about the position. And since I had done sales before, I had kind of known a little bit about what the expectations would be for a sales engineer, but I didn't know a ton about Puppet at the time. But as I learned more, it was super exciting, and kind of wanted to jump on board.
Gotcha. What about you, Grace? How did you hear about your position?
So I'd heard about Puppet for a couple of years because I was in the startup entrepreneurial space trying to get my own thing off the ground, which, since I'm here at Puppet, that it did not necessarily fly as far as I wanted it to, but all things happen for a reason, so it was all right. But I had met at an event, and by met Luke, I mean I was like 10 people behind, and looked him in the eye, but I was really impressed with what the company was doing. I had been trying to work on a concept of empathetic technologies, and I had identified Puppet as a tool that was an empathetic technology because it made the lives of individuals that most people never think about better, that being sysadmins. And so I was really intrigued company. So when my last endeavor kind of folded, I thought, well, that's a great place to look. So just looking at what positions were there, when I wanted to make a leap from being conceptually technical to being functionally technical, I wanted to build, and I didn't want to do exclusively software development. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more, for me, diverse in the skill set I could really utilize. And so I applied for the job, thinking that it was a lot like the sales engineer positions in other companies, which a lot of times sales engineers, it's not that they're not like super technical, they usually are, but wielding Puppet asks for technical knowledge about a lot of things, more than the traditional sales engineer usually has to know about because of what Puppet is as a tool. So once I applied for the job, I realized that I was wholly underqualified for that job. And so I actually did something that I don't know if most people do, but I spoke to the individual who's working in HR at the time, and I said, I know I did a phone screening with you, I know I did a phone interview, and I know you all want me to do the technical challenge, but I've looked at the technical challenge and I have no clue where to even start. Can I withdraw my application and reapply in a couple of months when there's another opening? And I requested that they tell me what things I needed to go learn in order to be qualified enough to apply for the position. It turned out they're like, well, what about an internship? And I was like, what about an internship? I'm an adult. And you know, because that's the right attitude to have, right? And so they were like, well, there might be an internship in that department. If so, would you be interested in applying for that? And so I said, sure, why not? I mean, you only live once, and interning, even though it's something we identify with undergraduates doing or younger people doing, it's a great way to make a career change. And that's what I wanted to do. So I applied for the internship position, interviewed for that, and I got it. They kept me because that was 26 months ago, and I'm not still an intern. So I think I've done all right.
I would say so. That's just very, very interesting story. And man, you tell some good stories. What was so cool about that is the kind of the, I would say, non-traditional way in which you kind of followed up, right? Like, so, you know, most people, when it, at least from my experience, I'll follow up after, you know, the initial interview, kind of not after, well, you know, after the initial interview, you kind of follow up, and it's more like, hey, you know, thanks for the interview. We really appreciate it, you know, your time, you know, looking forward to, you know, possibly working with you, that type of thing. And you kind of went about that in a different manner, but it worked. So, you know, that's something people should keep in the back of their heads. You know, I mean, it's not always about the traditional route, right? It's be creative in every aspect of the process, right? I think that's pretty cool. So let me ask you about, you know, so you get the internship. Tell us a little bit about the interview process. How did you begin to prepare? You know, what type of questions were they asking during the interview? You can expound on that a little bit.
Will you say all of that again? Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so I did the quintessential help desk fix. I restarted my computer while talking to you all on my cell phone. So now the audio is working because I turned everything off and turned it back on.
Excellent.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no doubt. So, you know, kind of leading into, you know, you were talking about your internship at Puppet. So I wanted to ask about the interview process, you know, kind of, you know, give us a little bit of insight as to what the interview process was like. You know, how did you prepare mentally? Were there, you know, multiple rounds of interviews? Just give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, definitely. So what really surprised me about the interview process for the internship is at the time it was very similar to the interview process for full-time employees. So it was a half-a-day event with, I believe, 4 or 5 different interviews that were anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes to an hour long, that ranged from ones about, you know, cultural fit or team fit, how you work in a team environment, to ones where you had to explain and share about a technology and how you teach about technologies. So what I did to prepare is the same reason why I backed out initially when I applied for the real job. I think that you have to be very, very honest about yourself and your skill set, what you can do, what you can't do, and what you're willing to learn how to do. So what I did is when they asked a technical question that I didn't understand, I said, you know what, I don't understand this question, but I wonder if we can talk about the pieces of this question and I can explain or do something with that, right? And I think a lot of times we're told everyone says, fake it till you make it.
Right.
And I think that that's a dangerous philosophy because it has an element of A, you don't deserve to be there, and B, you don't really know what you're doing. But I think you can, I say visualize until you realize. So I think you can say, I don't know, but I want to learn. That's what I really focused a lot of my interview on. When I didn't know, I said, I don't know, but is it like this? And then I would give another example, whether it be technical or professional or team-based, of what I understood the question to be asking. So I got to the heart of the matter. A lot of times questions, especially in technical interviews, it's to see how you think. A lot of people fret about the technical portion. They're like, oh my God, what if they ask me about this? What if they tell me to draw this? What if they tell me to write this code? But it's about how you think. And I think preparing for a technical interview is about recognizing how you learn and how you can help someone understand your learning process, because that's what they really want to see.
Excellent, excellent. And great tips, great tips. James, can you tell us a little bit about your interview process? Kind of, what type of questions were you asked, and if that's something that you can divulge, and were there multiple rounds of interviews? Take us through that whole thing.
Yeah, so it's fairly similar to what Grace just outlined. The main thing was a couple of rounds of phone interviews, the technical challenge that all candidates kind of have to make it through, where they kind of give you an assignment or a little task that you have to be able to accomplish. And then after that, you go on site and do a full day, essentially, of interviews back to back with people in different roles, different people that would be kind of interfacing with you if you were to get the job. And they ask you the full gamut of questions, from things like, well, how would you do this on, a Linux machine, to, what do you know about, Puppet or coding, or it might be, what do you do if there's someone asks you a question and you have no idea what the answer is? And so a lot of it is, kind of figuring out, how you want to respond to these different situations that might come up. And, very similar to what Grace said, it's pretty important to be, candid about what you know, what you don't, because usually, if you're faking it, it can come out pretty quickly in an interview. They're usually kind of looking for that, whether or not you're going to be the kind of person that's trying to deceive customers or anything like that. So they might even ask you a question that they kind of expect you not to know, just to see if you try to, BS your way through it, if you will. So it was interesting. But, overall, a lot of it was just those kinds of questions.
Excellent, excellent. And so, so we talk about some of the technical skills that are needed, and or the technical questions that you were asked. How can someone go about, say, for instance, they might want to apply to Puppet and they feel that they may need to kind of brush up on a certain tech stack? What are some good courses, or maybe some things that they can read online? Just what are some things that they can do to prepare, I guess, themselves beforehand?
Yeah, so I always feel like if you're interviewing for like a sales engineer job, it's important to come at it from the perspective of a customer, because that's going to be who you're dealing with most of the time. And so, in the case of Puppet, you're dealing with, sysadmins for Linux and Windows. And so it's kind of good to brush up on the kind of things that they're going to be doing in their day-to-day jobs. What are the kind of tasks they have to do? All right, how do I do that? Is there a way that I can set up an environment like that at home? Do I need to go somewhere to be able to get access to that kind of equipment? Those are the things that you kind of have to do to make sure you're equipped and able to speak the same language as the customers are going to be speaking when you're trying to sell to them. And then similarly, the other side that I used to kind of prepare was reading through as much of the marketing material as possible for the tool that I would be selling, because that gives you a good idea of, how do they perceive themselves? How do they feel that they're solving the problem? And you can start to try to fill a lot of the gaps in between those two experiences. to be able to, put yourself in a good light when it comes time to actually interview.
Excellent, excellent. And so I want to pose the same question to you, Grace, and because you kind of you were stating how you went through the interview, and there were things that you didn't know. Kind of give us a little bit of insight on how you went about, after the interview. What did you do to go back and kind of say, these are the skills that I see that they're looking for, that I'm going to be needing when I start, or if I start? How did you go about, discovering or finding out ways to kind of build up those skills?
Totally. So one thing that I asked during my interview is, where should I begin technically? Because it's big, right? And a lot of times if you're new to a field, you don't even know the beginning in order to even get to where you need to go. So I asked, what should I be working on? What should I be learning? Whether I get this internship or not, how can I get myself on a path to be here at some point? And so I took notes when they told me, right? They're like, you should learn some Linux. You should learn a little something about networking. You should get a sense of what is traditional configuration management. How do people do it in the world now? How do people write scripts? You should learn Bash. So I took notes, and then I said to myself, well, I'm only one person, and how much of this can I truly consume, right? So I created what I ended up being able to do during my internship, but I created a process for learning that. So before I could even learn Bash, I had to learn a little bit about Linux. What is Linux? How do you communicate with, a server? What do I even need to know how to do? So I ordered it. And then I said, I'm going to start at the beginning of this ordering instead of learning pieces at a time. So I prepared myself to even be able to understand what Puppet was as a tool. And so I think a lot of times if there's a technology you're interested in and there's a position you're interested in, but you don't know what your technical experience is, or if it's a good fit for that job, start at the beginning of that thing, right? A lot of people just jump straight in. I'm not going to throw any industry under the bus, but I have a lot of friends who decided they wanted to learn how to code. And so they just pick a language. And I'm like, you just picked a language? Like, did you go look at other languages? Did you? And they're like, no, I just thought that I'd just take this Python class because I love Python, so I'm on Team Python. But I was interested as to why they didn't experiment with something else. I was like, why wouldn't you even just go Google like programming languages, look at image shots of them, and see if there's something that you understand by reading or looking at, and if there's something you want to yourself write. And so just little things like that. It's a big space. Everyone wants to get in somewhere, but pick a place where you can be happy and really thrive in the learning. Because I'll tell you one thing, if you're learning something that you're not interested in learning, you're not going to keep learning it. Or when you finish learning it, which there's no such thing as being done learning, you're going to be unhappy with where you are. You're going to feel stuck. So I definitely encourage people that get a chance to learn something from scratch, purposefully choose that thing so that you can be passionate about it on the days that it's not as much fun to learn.
Excellent answers. Thank you. So I want to pose this question to James. Now that you've been at Puppet for a few years, what do you think is kind of the best way for potential candidates to demonstrate that they have the necessary and skills for a position like the one you currently have? Kind of, I don't know if you've been involved in like the hiring process at all at Puppet, but kind of if you can give us some insight as to, just maybe even from the beginning, like, first look at a resume and then, during the interview, like what are some of the things that, you would be looking for in a candidate?
Yeah. So, if I was looking at someone's resume, one of the first things would be, do they have some experience that would let me know that they would be able to empathize with the customers that we generally work with? Would they be able to walk in, have a conversation with them, and be able to relate to the kinds of problems that they have? And it might not necessarily be, some specific, certification or, operating system that they work with before, but just generally kind of understanding what problems they're going to be facing, what pressures they're going to have from their management, and just, how to work with them as people. So that's one of the first things. And in terms of actually when it comes time to talking with them or interviewing them, one of the biggest things is doing kind of what Grace was talking about, where, being humble, understanding when you have limitations, and then also taking responsibility when you do run into those. So if you have like a first round interview and you're talking with them, maybe there's a couple of things that you don't know. There's nothing wrong with maybe taking a little bit of that, that stuff that you didn't know, studying up a little bit, and then following up with them proactively saying like, hey, I looked into that a little bit more. I wanted to just kind of show that I'm taking that extra step or initiative to be able to prove that, I'll work hard for this, or I'm willing to kind of go that extra mile for it. And little gestures like that can go a huge way, because as Grace was kind of saying, especially with Puppet, you end up touching so many different technologies that no one we hire knows everything. You kind of have to be able to show up day one and be willing to roll up your sleeves and learn. And so I'm looking for someone that's going to be willing to actually take that initiative and do it.
I think you touched on something very important that I think be kind of intimidated to do, and that's not necessarily this kind of follow up after, but it's hey, in case you were considering me for this position, like I looked into what you were saying, because most people, at least I would think, that after the interview they would think if I didn't answer the question then it can't be answered now, right? And from what I understand, from what I'm hearing from you, is that it's okay to go back and say, you know what, I did some digging, I looked into that, and I do understand that, and here's what you were trying to convey, and here's kind of how I would go about maybe fixing that or doing whatever, but just to kind of show your competency in what they were saying. Maybe you didn't understand it at that very moment, or maybe you were just nervous. So I think that's a good thing to kind of relay to people listening in, or people who will be watching this, that it's not too late just because the interview is over. If you have a way to reach back out and say to the people who were interviewing you, that it's totally okay. So excellent points there. So Grace, let me ask you, what do you think is important as far as a potential candidate's like web presence? Like, what are there some things that you've been inside Puppet for over 2 years now? Are there some things that that they would look at, or look out for, like as far as their web presence?
So that's a great question, actually. I don't think I've been asked that ever. I think that what's really important is, what kind of web presence do you need for the position you're in? So this is what I mean by that. When I applied for my position at Puppet, I at least had a GitHub identity, right? I didn't have that many commits. I hadn't really done that much, but I maybe had like 2 commits, and it was like changing the README, but I had something on there. You're going to an interview, you're saying, I want to work in this technology, or I want to do this, but you've never even opened up an account on a website like GitHub where you commit your code, where you writing your code. Are you writing code? Right? So I think that you should make sure your web presence correlates with what you need. You're going in for a job on website design. You want to be a software developer, but you've never built a website, even if it's a little janky something where you can be like, go to www.grace.com, which don't go there, people, because that does not exist. So that they can go see what you did. And you can even allude to that, like, in preparation for this interview, I built this small website. I was using a WordPress framework. It allowed for me to do X, Y, Z, right? Just show. So even if you create a web presence for the interview, make sure that you're doing something that shows initiative and drive forward to the position. And so that's what's more impressive to me than anything else, is when that web presence actually correlates with what you're about to do, not just because you have one. And what I've also been impressed with is people's non-work related projects. So what I mean by that is, we've had people interview who've been working on chatbots, and they're like, oh yeah, I've been actually working on chatbots. I did this with Slack and I use, right? And so they get excited and they light up when talking about a technology. Maybe it's not the technology they're interviewing to work with, right? But they get excited about a technical component and then they can share that with you. Like, oh, I actually was, writing a blog about it at aboutme.com, whatever, So, and they're like, here's my URL for my blog. You can check out all the things I did, how I set up the chatbots, what I was using as my, what modules I was using or whatever. And so it's always exciting to be able to, you as the interviewer, go and see who this person is outside of work in a capacity that still informs the work they do, right? So I get really excited about that. My web presence has a lot of different things in it, and all of it is about technology, but not necessarily building tech. A lot of the stuff that I'm online for is about working with encouraging communities of color and women to get into technology, right? But that's my web presence. I can still talk about it. I can still say, oh, I did this training, or I gave this talk, or I attended this and gave this workshop. And so I can give that to somebody too. So I always want to encourage people to not be discouraged if they don't have a super technical web presence. They can still take the presence they currently have, or they can build one in anticipation of a position.
Excellent. Very good answer. So, I'll with you with the next question, Grace. You mentioned earlier something about documentations and soft skills. Kind of, can you tell me a little bit about why that's important in your role, and kind of why should that be important for a potential candidate as well?
Totally. Documentation is really important in our role, and James can hopefully co-sign on this, because a lot of the work we do has to be rapid. And so what I mean by that is you may have a customer conversation on Monday. They might say, we got to get this demo before Friday because, the lead on the technical team will be on PTO for 3 weeks and we want to make a purchasing decision while he or she is gone. Oh, okay. And if it's not something that you're familiar with or a technology that you know about, everyone knows you go to the first place where you can get help. That's the internet. The internet itself is living, breathing documentation on a lot of stuff. And a lot of us have went to the internet to look at people's READMEs on GitHub, to look at people's instructional demonstrations on their personal websites. We've read something, because videos are also great. That's another form of documentation. Or we've watched something to learn a skill. So it's really important because documentation allows for you and other people to rapidly learn. And we're humans and our brains forget. So sometimes even if you did that thing, how do you remember how you did it? Maybe you tried 4 or 5 different ways. Which of the 4 or 5 different ways actually ended up working? So documentation is really vital to an effective workflow that's not full of redundancies. Because you can look at something and say, oh, okay, James has these 4 or 5 steps, and this is what he did, and this was the end result. Let me follow these 4 or 5 steps and learn as I go, but still have a model for getting to the right answer. And so to me, documentation is like painting by numbers or connecting the dots to build a picture. If there's good documentation, you always get the right image. And when you go wrong, you know why. And so that's why documentation is so important. And in the work we do, it's vital because that's how we learn. We share each other's documentation in order for us to grow in our skills and rapidly build so that we can satisfy customer needs.
And Puppet in itself is documentation.
Right.
Excellent, excellent. So is there anything else that you think that, people should know? I'll pose this one to you, James, that you think people should know about, entering this field or getting a role with Puppet?
Yeah, I would really just say, if people are interested in it, the best thing that you can do is just get started, in whatever capacity that might be. Maybe it's, just downloading some free software off the internet to run a virtual machine and just playing around with it as a sandbox. Expect to break things and don't worry about it. Just getting started is the most important step. And a lot of times, people can kind of let fear be a blocker to that of, oh, well, what if I mess this up? What if I don't do it right? Oh, I don't know. And that can be such a roadblock to actually making progress toward, a goal of getting into that field or getting a career there. And, so it's just make sure you go through those steps, talk to people that have already done it, and see what you can learn to kind of expedite that process.
Excellent, excellent. And Grace, I know you mentioned culture in an earlier question. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So what role for you does culture play in kind of determining whether or not you accept a position, and how do you suggest kind of presenting questions like during the interview process in regards to talking about culture at that?
That's a really good question. I'll say a few things. I think that the team that I'm on at Puppet, both inside and external facing and internal facing team, is full of people who I think we're all actually very different as people, but the core of who we are is the same. So that's what I identify as culture. Whatever we manifest as is what it is, right? But the insides, besides just your inner organs, are very similar. And so what I mean is our team, everyone is like well-humored, everyone is into sharing, everyone really likes teaching and learning. Everyone likes to experiment and isn't afraid to not be good at something. Everyone is very relaxed about saying, well, I don't know. How do you do it? Let's try it together. To me, that's the culture. And those are the kinds of questions you have to ask. You have to say stuff like, well, when a team member is falling behind, how does the team help them get on board? If someone has a personal issue and has to miss work, how is that handled? Right? And because I think people always go to ask questions like, what's your PTO policy? What do you all pay for training? You pay for my certification? And those aren't the appropriate questions, right? You ask, what's your investment in my education?
Yes.
And then you blink very quickly and with no words. It's once again, the same way about how do you interview or answer questions, how do you ask them? You get to the heart of the matter. What are you actually trying to know, right? I am the only female on my team, and I did ask a question at the time of the other only female on the team, and I said, how are you treated on this team? How do you feel being here, right? And so instead of saying, well, what's your thoughts on women in technology? I said, how do you feel here? Right? And she's like, it's a great team, yes. I like it. And that's what won me over, stuff like that. Because those questions are person to person. I don't want you to give me some theory of change. I don't want you to tell me about your philosophy on work culture. I don't care. What about you and what about me? Right? And so I think that people should really invest the time in figuring out how they're comfortable asking those kinds of questions and ask them. Because those are the things that really matter. And the thing I really like to see is I always ask to see where the team sits. And not because I need to know if we get in a corner office or something cushy like that, but because I want to see how are they interacting with each other. So you just told me that this is a supportive team that's invested in the education of all of the members and that you all actively provide opportunities to learn something new. Okay, show me. Right? What are you working on that's new? Yes. How is this company supporting you in doing that? Can I go see the rest of your team? Can I meet them? Right?
Be bold.
Right? And so,
I like that approach. Yeah.
Because it's the only way you're going to get, and some questions don't have verbal answers. So if I go into that section, if you come into our section of the office, you're going to see us laughing, cutting up, working really hard in our work, but we're having a good time, right? Or we're working together and having a conversation, or we're sharing a meal together, right? You're going to see that we're a team. And so what we told you about being a team is not just lip service. We're actually doing the action of that thing. And so I have so many friends, and I myself have done this, where I went into a job a little like, because the energy felt off, but I took it anyway because I needed to eat. And I realized halfway through, well, not a good idea. And had I asked those questions or even watched the people who I was going to work with, I probably would have known that right off the bat. So just being really mindful of that kind of stuff, I think, is really vital to getting a good sense of how you'll do and how you'll feel on a team.
Oh, wow. So that was gold. That was no, because there's a difference. You brought a totally different perspective on asking about culture. You're not just you want the company to not just kind of give you kind of the company spiel about culture. You want to actually see it, and you want to feel it, right? You want that whole thing to be a lot more personable. So you're not asking about, you're asking that person, which is honestly I haven't heard of. But it's great that you're bringing that up, because that's the type of information that people within our community should know, and they should approach these potential positions in the future with that same boldness, right? And I think what that gives you empowerment to me, right? Because you already feel at times when you go into some of these interviews that you're at a disadvantage. And I think that kind of gives you a little bit more empowerment to say, you have to be this certain way in order for me to even want this position. I'm not just going to say, I want your company to be this way for me, because this is what I need in order to take this position. So I think that's excellent. Excellent answer. So, James, I want to pose this question to you. You've been there for a little while. What are some things about the job that you didn't anticipate before you took the position that you feel would be beneficial right now for a candidate to know? Like you got in a position and you realize, oh wow, I wish I would have known this before I started.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First and foremost, while I had done sales engineering before, I had never done it in the field. So it was a completely different experience being 100% remote, and figuring out how to kind of adopt work culture, given that I'm in my own house right now versus out there at HQ, being able to interact with all of my coworkers. So having that distance and kind of figuring out how to keep a good cadence, how to still be in contact with people, find answers when I need them, was something that I kind of had to learn on the fly. So definitely having a little bit more info on that, or just some better perspective on that before I had started would have been helpful. But it's one of those things that just like everything else with Puppet, you kind of just learn as you go. And then, the other thing is I didn't necessarily expect how much I would have to learn. When I joined, it's one of those things that, I knew it was going to be some new technologies that I was going to be dealing with. But, every conversation I have with customers, there's a very good chance they're going to bring up some technology I've never heard of before that I'm going to have to go look up after the meeting and, see whether that's something that we can support or help them with or whatnot. So, it's more than any particular technology, just the need to be that flexible that I've had to adjust to, and also just being comfortable with being uncomfortable, where I'm not necessarily going to be an expert in a lot of the things that I'm talking about, but being able to bring what skills I do have to the table to still move things in a positive direction without having to feel like I have to be the master or expert in absolutely everything. And just getting comfortable with that fact.
Right. So let me ask you this, and this goes back to what Grace was talking about earlier, just about from a cultural standpoint. You're a new, let's say you're a potential candidate. What would you say to someone in order to kind of what's a good way to put this? let's put it like this: someone coming into the company, right? Even though, you know, say they ask these questions and everything like that, they still don't know 100% what to expect. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you can get into this thing where, you know, you don't want to seem like the person who doesn't know enough, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say to someone kind of coming into that, you know, that scenario, you know, as far as, you know, hey, you know, be yourself or whatever, you know, what advice would you give to somebody in that particular situation?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is it can feel daunting when you're coming into a new company and there's all these people that know what's going on, and you're kind of the odd person out trying to figure out how to navigate it. I'd say the most important thing is find one person. You know, Puppet does a good job of just having like a buddy system when you first get started. So you kind of have a person designated that you're supposed to kind of have these more direct conversations with. But even outside of that, find like, you know, one person that you're pretty comfortable with, that that's kind of gone through the ropes a little bit. It doesn't even have to be the same position you're working in, but they can be that person that can be a sanity check that you can, you know, be a little bit more open with. You can say, hey, I know this might be a stupid question, but let me just throw this out there. Can you help me out? And dealing with one individual can be a lot easier than trying to take on the entire organization and, you know, just maybe drown in the sea of people.
Right. Grace, do you want to add on to that? Do you have anything to chime in?
I'm over here nodding like an old lady in church. I'm ready to feel myself and talk because I'm gonna tell you why. James was one of those people for me. So when I first started, I had to learn. I was so overwhelmed by how much I had to learn, right? And I think that the one thing I'll also say about that is you might have to do some like internal work to feel very comfortable feeling very dumb for a very long time. And I think that that's something that, you know, I enjoy learning. So I have a lot of moments where I'm like, I really just don't know what this is about. But I did not realize that was going to be every day at work for like 8 to 10 hours a day for like a year. Right. So I wasn't prepared for that. And so I think that, you know, what James said is absolutely vital. And then finding, I don't want to call it venting because I don't like when people complain without solutions. It's one thing to realistically assess your situation, be sad about it, be mad about it, but then figure out how you can get glad about it because you got to change it. You can't just wallow. So I would give myself like 15 minutes. I was like, I'm going to complain for 15 minutes and I'm going to pick a complaint partner. I had someone in the company that, can I talk to you real quick? I just need to complain for 15 minutes about the fact that I think I can't read right now. I don't know what's going on. What is everybody talking about? What's that over there? Right? So someone that can say, okay, I've been here, I've done that. So you have someone you can go to with questions, and it can sometimes be one and the same, right? James has gotten many a message from me with some weird emoji that's like dying in a corner somewhere. So it's not a strange thing, right? To have that person be one and the same, but give yourself a hard stop, but let yourself be comfortable with discomfort, like James said, and be comfortable knowing that you're starting somewhere, and that's actually really painful and kind of really sucks. And the thing that I don't like that people don't do is that folks are never real about that. It's really hard as anything, any living creature, to learn something new. It's really hard when you're an adult. It's really hard when you have the stresses of maybe family, when you have bills to pay, and you're trying to learn, and you're trying to work, and you're trying to produce good work. Like it's a lot of pressure for one person to carry. And I think it's very honest to say it sucks and it's hard. And I think that a lot of people are like, no, just keep your head down and work. Especially our people. You know, we get into the workforce and we'll hear people say stuff like, well, just be grateful you have a job, or just keep your head down and just work. And I think that we should all be pushing towards not just surviving at work, but thriving at work. And how do you get there? You got to have good mental health practices. Walk away. If you're trying to learn something, trying to do something, it's not working, walk away, do something else. Take a walk, take a breath, meditate. you know, like eat a piece of fruit. Like, I don't know what you need to do, but make sure that you have for you a plan for when things go wrong and how to give yourself the kind of empathy you're trying to give to others and to yourself. I think especially when it comes with learning technical tools or technical things, because you'll be doing the same thing over and over and over and getting it wrong, potentially for days. But like the hard stop you have for venting, you should have a hard stop for self-teaching. A lot of times we also think that because it's tech, and apparently everyone learned how to code at 4 years old in their mother's basement, all by themselves without ever seeing anything else, ever getting on anyone's Slack channel, ever watching anything, because they were born with keyboards in their hands. You know, like, cause that's the narrative, right? That's everyone's like, oh yeah, I taught myself how to code when I was 9. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Like, it's impossible. Like, something happened that triggered that experience, and then you started learning, but there was a beginning, right? So I always like to remind people, everyone's beginning, maybe yours was at 9, and maybe yours is going to be at 29, but it's somewhere. And I think that we should all be very real about our beginning so that other people can know that it's okay to struggle, and we should be able to do that in a safe way. So that, I mean, my biggest encouragement is find your allies, and have that person and have your process for learning and know what that is for you, and have resource for asking for help. And so a colleague of mine told me, he's like, you know, if I work on something and I don't get anywhere after 90 minutes, I ask for someone else to help me. He's like, because 90 minutes is enough time for me to try a few things, read a few things, watch a few videos, maybe go take a water break, come back to it and try again. And he's like, don't spend half a day failing. So everyone should
like that.
Hard stop, right? So also identifying when you want to ask for help or what that, and who you go to for that.
Do you know Ayori Selassie? Have you? No? I need to connect you with her. She runs a program called Life Model Canvas. And she also runs another program called Tech Playground, where it teaches, it's not all just technical stuff. It's everything else that is involved with tech as well. And one of the things you were talking about was mental health, right? There's a whole, kind of thing just even involving, your health, physical health, mental health, in regards to being a person in technology. And she really talks a lot about that aspect of it. Whereas people they kind of let that fall by the wayside, right? They talk about the technical skills, but they don't talk about the things that it takes for you to perform at an optimal level, right? Your mental health, your physical health. And she really delves into that. And you said a lot of things that kind of touched in that same realm. So I want to make that connection because you two are on that same wavelength. Another thing that you mentioned that I really liked was the timeline. Not the hard stops, but you said, getting into the job, starting to learn, and you're learning for 8 to 10 hours a day for a year, right? Like, people going into a situation might not expect that, but the other part of it is they might not think that that's okay, right? Like they go into it thinking that, oh, if I don't ramp up in 1 month, then, I suck. I might get fired. Like, going into a new environment, especially a complex environment, right? And learning the ins and outs of that environment. And that's a daunting and hard task to accomplish. That's not something that you're going to learn overnight. And it's going to take you a while to learn the ins and outs of that infrastructure, the way they do things, the way everything is set up, where their documentation is at, the IP addresses of all these, machines. All this stuff takes a lot of time to learn. And I found that typically a year is when you start to feel like you know something, right? Not that you know everything, that you know something, unless you're some type of crazy prodigy. it normally takes you about a year in to get kind of comfortable with where you're at. So I think, you mentioning that is really good tip. I want to ask one final question before we get out of here. It's been about an hour, so I'll start with you, Grace. What are some do's and don'ts that you think people should be aware of, things that you've seen either before and after an employee has been hired? Like, what are some do's? Like, oh, you shouldn't do that during an interview, or when you're trying to seek a job, and when after somebody's been hired and they do something like, oh, you definitely shouldn't do that, or maybe it's something they should do.
I think before you're hired, I think that the number one mistake, and one of my only don'ts when you're interviewing, is don't assume the job is yours. I mean, I've been guilty of this too. I'm like, wow, it feels like they wrote this job for me. I'm just gonna slide on it and get it. I think that's something to be very mindful of. And humility, you can have confidence and be humble, and that exudes. So that is my number one. Don't come in assuming the job is yours. Do be confident in your skills and still exhibit humility. For me, I think that, I don't know, I'm West African, so sometimes I'm at work and I'm just looking at people like, I feel like you act like this is your house. And so I keep it to myself on the inside, because I realize that maybe the standard in which my parents raised me was a little more kind of like reserved, right? Especially in public facing places. And I've had to learn how to become a little more comfortable as who I am. But I always say the first day, present the version of yourself that you would maybe present on the first day of school, right? Like, you're happy to be there, you're excited, you want to look nice, and you want to be eager to participate. So treat it like the first day of like 5th grade or something, right? You were ready to go to school, you've been waiting all summer, you can't contain your excitement, and come in enthusiastic and exuberant. I think that is the greatest thing you can step into a space with, is your energy. And that's the kind of stuff that your first couple of days of work, when you're not really contributing too much because you're receiving a lot, is the kind of stuff that makes people want to keep helping you and working with you.
Excellent, excellent. And what about you, James?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest don't would be, my opinion, don't forget the basics. The amount of interviews I've been on where, the person has known the technology, they were great, they seem like they would get along with customers just fine, but then they, started to rub someone the wrong way by forgetting a follow-up email saying thanks for the interviews, or, they maybe say something that rubbed someone kind of the wrong way because maybe it's a little rude or out of place. The amount of times that I've seen someone fall out of favor because of that has been more than I can count. So I would say, like, just focus on, basic interview skills. Make sure that you're at least bringing that to the table, because that stuff can, it can sneak up on you and cost you the job, even if everything else was perfect. And then for things to do, I would say, definitely just get to know yourself and really reflect on it. Because especially if you're going to do a career change or a job change, you kind of have to start figuring out, well, what motivates me? Like, why do I want to take a job like this? Am I going to be able to put in the work? Am I going to enjoy putting in the work? All of that's going to be super, super critical. So, just figuring out how you learn. Do I learn best through books? Do I need to start reading stuff? Do I need to talk to people? Do I need to watch some videos? Do I need to just do it? Figuring out what best works for you personally will help you not get overwhelmed when you're introduced to all of these new people and things, and start just trying to do stuff that they tell you without considering your own needs. So that would be kind of the two things I would advise.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time out to answer my questions and give some very, very good answers to our audience. I think what the things that you all touched on is going to be really, really good information to take back to our community. So I really appreciate that. Before we jump off of here, how can people get in contact? Two things. How can people get in contact with you if they want to reach out, if they want to follow you? And is Puppet hiring, and where can they go to find out about jobs at Puppet? I'll let you go first, Grace.
So to contact me, you can just simply use smoke signals. I'll be patrolling for them usually early evening. No, to contact me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people there. I try to check it often to see what's happening in the world. So that's a great place to contact me. Or you can also contact me. I'm trying to figure out if I should really just put my personal email address out there in the streets like that. But you can contact me at grace@puppet.com. And that is the traditional spelling of Grace. If you don't know what that is, I can't help you too much there. And I'm always happy to like talk to folks, email back and forth, hop on the phone. I think being accessible is the only way to live your life. So please feel free to hang out and to call me and all that fun stuff. And by call me, I mean email me. And and then for the career piece, before I move on to James, it's puppet.com/company/careers. But if you type in careers.puppet.com, I think it'll take you there.
Okay.
I lied. If you do puppet.com/careers, it'll take you there. And then you can start to look at all the openings that we have.
Excellent. Last but not least, James.
Yep. So kind of the same deal. James.Jones at puppet.com is my email. And then LinkedIn is definitely the best place to reach me. I have a Twitter, but I haven't posted there in years, and I don't really check anything there, so I'm not even going to give that out. It's not really worth it. So that would be the best place to do it. And then, yeah, feel free to connect me. Glad to talk to anybody if they have questions. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. Cool. Well, thanks both of you once again, and hopefully I get to see both of you at PuppetConf this year.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.